When the war ended, we were overtaken by the Russians. And I don't know if most people know that, but the Russians were the most cruel and vicious army in the world. So after a while, we got out of there and we got to the British zone. We got out by hook and by crook. It wasn't easy. My mother had forged some paperwork, and it took a while to get out of there. We went through different refugee camps and ended up in a place in the British zone, and where we lived for 8.5 years. And that's where I started school. And I think they thought that the teachers were all Nazis. Of course, that was a big joke. They were just normal, average people. Food was very scarce. We slept on the ground on straw, which isn't all that bad. You know, they were pretty well organized. It's not what I see on television now. Because, you know, we were defeated and we knew it and we behaved well. The most important thing was to have safety. So we got away from the Russians. The British were a lot better. And to get something to eat. There was a horrible shortage of doctors. A lot of them were sent to Russia and Siberia. Some of them came back slowly later. Many never came back. You know, she had to take care of us in many different ways, including getting food, even in refugee camps. I remember one time when we were traveling by train, that was still getting out of the Russian zone. We were in boxcars, stuffed full of people, and I found it hard to breathe, and I lost track of my mother, and that was probably the greatest fear I ever experienced. But we found each other again. Well, you couldn't really move, so people shifted around, so for a short time I lost track of her. Well, bread. You know, Germans always ate a lot of bread. Good bread. Not the white bread that we eat here. So that was pretty good. And yeah, if there was soup, that was great. The one thing I notice now with the so-called refugees we see here in the Mideast, they all seem to be well-dressed. Well, we weren't well-dressed. We just barely got away from home, and we went through many weeks of traveling, a lot of it on foot and horseback, on a boat and so forth. So we were pretty, as refugees go, we were pretty shabby looking. Two of my sisters only had one pair of shoes between them. So they had to take turns wearing the shoes. So again, those weren't the biggest hardships. The hardships were leaving home and into an uncertain future and getting something into our stomachs. You know, food and shelter are the most important things. Food is the most important. She was always positive, but there wasn't much to be positive about. It's just, you know, keep your heads up and get enough to eat. It is about hope. You may have hope, but you didn't know how things would happen. Well, the little village we lived in normally had about 1,000 people in it. And with all the refugees, there were 2,000. So they all had to double up in their homes, which was not easy for most. And some people just got a little one room and they had to put up a little stove so they could cook, and nothing that made life very easy, of course, at the time. Well, we're still in the Russian zone. My mother and dad made contact through another relative in Bavaria. Almost starved to death. He was down to 96 pounds, I think, from 156. They had to eat grass at times and tree bark just to get something in the stomach. Must have been in 48 he came to where we lived, and we lived together after that. But he didn't have a job or anything. Well, we lost our home, very crowded, and so, especially my dad, he didn't want to stay there. So he applied in many different countries if they would take us. And let's see, I don't remember all of them. It was US, Canada, Paraguay, Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand. That's about it. But nothing worked. I guess they didn't take people, or they had very high restrictions. You had to sign up. Like I remember for Canada, you had to sign up for having the whole family work in the sugar beet fields. They had us all strip and line up, the men line up here and the women line up in a different room. And they checked us out very critically, and somehow they found out my sister had a little problem with her lungs, one of my sisters. So we got notice, well, you all stay or she stays. So the decision was made. My sister moved to some relatives in Bavaria, and we were able to go. And we had to have sponsors here in the U.S., and we got one through the Lutheran World Federation, and here in Eastern Washington, but they backed out later on for some reason. And then they found one in Idaho, Kendrick, Idaho, not far from Lewiston. They had a guarantee that they'd give us a job for 2 years. So that's how we got to Kendrick, Idaho, on a farm. That's where my dad worked for a couple of years, and for my brother and myself, we were 3 years apart. It was a great adventure. I just like to do what's needed, what needs to be done.